Nia moved like the whisper of a breeze through the thatched house, her hands steady, precise, even as her heart felt heavy. The flickering oil lamp cast long shadows across the floor, illuminating her calloused fingers as they threaded a needle through torn silk. She stitched quietly in the corner, the rhythm of the needle her only comfort in a world that had forgotten her worth. She had once been the center of a happier home. Her father, Kwaku, had been the village's most revered tailor, famous for his intricate embroidery and patterns that told stories without words. When Nia was young, she would sit on a woven mat beside him, eyes wide with wonder, learning the secrets of color and cloth. He used to say, "Fabrics speak, my daughter. You just have to listen with your heart." But death silenced his voice too soon. And with his passing came a new era, a colder one. Nia's stepmother, Mafo, took control of the household. Though she was beautiful and regal in public, her heart was bitter toward anything that reminded her of Kwaku's first wife. Nia, with her quiet eyes and resemblance to her late mother, became the target of that resentment. Her stepsisters, Salama and Kojo, followed their mother's lead, treating Nia as if she were nothing more than a house servant. While they spent their days braiding their hair and gossiping, Nia toiled, scrubbing, stitching, and staying out of sight. Yet despite the heaviness of her days, Nia never allowed bitterness to take root. She found beauty in small things, the shimmer of fabric in sunlight, the way birds sang during the morning wash, and the thrill of creating something lovely with her hands. Her dreams were stitched into every hem she repaired and every thread she pulled tight. In her quiet world, hope remained, delicate but unbroken. The village was abuzz with news of an upcoming wedding, one that had set every heart fluttering. The chief's eldest son, Edu, was to marry a girl from a neighboring kingdom. The celebrations promised to be the grandest in years. Drummers were already practicing their rhythms, and colorful cloths were being dyed in deep reds and golds. It was the kind of affair where every young woman dreamed of being seen, admired, perhaps even chosen for her grace or charm. Nia longed to go, not to find a suitor but to witness beauty. To stand among joy and dance beneath the stars like she had as a child before loss turned her world gray. She imagined wearing something her father might have made, flowing fabric with swirling patterns of gold thread, her feet bare against the earth, her hair free like the wind. But her dreams remained secret. She knew Mafo would never allow her to attend. The stepmother had already commissioned new gowns for Salama and Kojo from one of the merchant seamstresses in the next village. Nia had been tasked with ironing and adjusting them, her own longing silenced beneath every fold. As the wedding day drew near, the house was filled with laughter and preparations, but not for her. Nia worked from sunrise to nightfall, fitting, hemming, and pressing. The sisters pranced in front of the mirror, critiquing their dresses and practicing smiles they would wear at the event. When they saw Nia watching silently, they laughed. "Why would someone like you go to a wedding like this?" Kojo sneered. "What would you wear, ashes and rags?" They all laughed, but Nia didn't respond. She simply looked down at her needle and thread, then back at the dress in her hands. A flicker of resolve rose in her chest. She might be forgotten, but she had not forgotten who she was, or where she came from. And even if she wasn't welcome at the celebration, something inside her whispered that her story wasn't over. The sound of drums echoed across the fields, carrying joy and anticipation on the wind. The entire village was alive with chatter, laughter, and the scent of roasted maize and spices. News had spread like wildfire. Prince Edu's wedding, originally thought to be an exclusive affair, would now be open to all. The royal family had decided that no doors should be closed on such a joyful union. Anyone who wished to witness the celebration was welcome. The announcement swept through the streets like a blessing. Young girls began planning hairstyles, women rushed to markets to gather fabric and beads, and men discussed what gifts they might bring to show respect. Nia heard the news while drawing water from the communal well. Her heart skipped a beat. For the first time she allowed herself to dream without restraint. Maybe, just maybe, she could stand in the crowd and witness the beauty her heart ached for. Later that evening, a messenger came, delivering invitations house by house. When he arrived at their door, Mafo greeted him with a syrupy smile. "For us?" she asked sweetly, accepting the scrolls without letting the man's eyes wander behind her to where Nia stood with flour-dusted hands. He nodded and moved on, unaware that inside stood someone who had waited a lifetime for such a chance. Mafo unrolled the scrolls and read them aloud with a theatrical flourish. "We are cordially invited to the royal wedding," she announced to her daughters, who squealed with excitement. Nia lingered quietly near the doorway, eyes fixed on the invitation as though it might float toward her if she wished hard enough. "And for me," she asked softly, unable to hide the tremble in her voice. Mafo turned slowly. You, she said with a laugh. The prince invited the village, not the servants. But I am part of the village, Nia whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Salama rolled her eyes. You wouldn't even have anything decent to wear. I could make something, Nia offered, her fingers unconsciously brushing the hem of her apron. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Nia crept into the storeroom where she kept scraps of fabric, leftovers from Mafo's commissions and old cloths too worn to be missed. She worked through the night, piecing together something beautiful and simple, something that carried echoes of her father's craft. The design was modest, but the colors shimmered like morning dew, and the stitching was done with love. By morning the dress was ready. Nia's eyes sparkled as she held it up against her frame. But when she returned from drawing water, she found the dress gone. The cupboard stood open and her scrap box lay overturned. She ran to the kitchen. Mafo, my dress, did you take it? Mafo turned from stirring the pot, feigning confusion. What dress? The one I made last night. Mafo's eyes turned cold. You must be dreaming, Nia. Maybe it walked away on its own. Salama and Kojo giggled behind their hands. Nia searched the entire house, but the dress was nowhere to be found. Her heart sank lower with each empty corner. As the hour approached, Nia watched them dress in the finest silks, golden earrings swaying and cheeks flushed with anticipation. The horses arrived, and the house was a storm of perfume, chatter, and rustling fabric. Then as the sun reached its peak they left, Mafo, Salama, and Kojo, stepping into the waiting cart with glee and pride. Nia heard the clatter of hooves grow faint in the distance. She ran to the front door only to find it barred shut. Panic surged through her chest. She turned to the back, also locked. She pushed at windows but the shutters had been fastened with ropes. Trap. She climbed to the loft, the only place that offered a view of the village path. From the small window, she could see the procession making its way toward the palace grounds. Laughter and color filled the horizon like a moving painting. She pressed her forehead to the glass, tears welling. She had stitched her dreams into every seam of that dress. And now, with nothing left but her longing, she watched her one chance disappear into the golden dust. The sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows across the quiet house. Inside, the silence was deafening. The laughter that had filled the rooms earlier had vanished with the last wheel turn of the cart that carried Mafo and her daughters away. Nia sat alone, unmoving at the foot of the wooden stairs. Her eyes, red from crying, stared blankly at the door that had refused to open. The whole world felt far away. As twilight deepened, she slowly rose and drifted toward her father's old sewing table. It stood tucked into the far corner of the room, covered in dust and draped in silence, untouched since the day he passed. It had always been his sacred space, where thread met vision and worn cloth became new again. Nia remembered how his hands moved like poetry over fabric, and how his eyes sparkled with stories while he worked. He used to say, "Needles carry more than thread, they carry the heart." She opened one of the drawers. Inside lay a folded piece of deep indigo fabric, unfinished, delicate, and still smelling faintly of the cedar chest it had once been stored in. Her father had saved it for something special. Maybe he never had time to complete it. Maybe he was waiting for her to grow into the hands he saw in her. With trembling fingers, she laid the cloth on the table and lit a single lamp. The room glowed dimly, shadows dancing against the walls. She found his old needles, slightly rusted but still strong, and spools of thread aged but unbroken. Her hands moved without thought, driven not by hope or joy, but by the dull ache in her chest. Stitch by stitch, she poured her sorrow into the fabric, her pain looping through every thread. Her tears fell silently, rolling down her cheeks and landing softly on the cloth. But as the first tear soaked into the indigo, something shifted. The room grew suddenly warm. The lamp flickered. She paused, startled. But grief was stronger than curiosity, so she kept sewing. Another tear. Another stitch. A faint shimmer rippled across the fabric. Nia blinked, unsure if it was her imagination or something else entirely. She leaned closer, and for a moment she could swear the thread beneath her fingers was glowing faintly, like moonlight trapped in silk. The wind picked up outside, brushing against the house in low sighs. The shutters creaked. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called. But inside, the room was still, except for the shimmering cloth and Nia's quiet breathing. A warmth spread from the cloth into her hands, as if the fabric itself recognized her sorrow. The unfinished piece seemed to come alive, folding itself, tightening its seams with an invisible hand. The patterns that emerged were not the ones she had planned, flowers and stars, feathers and tears, woven into one breathtaking design. And still she cried. Not loudly. Not with rage. But the soft, tired weeping of someone who had carried too much for too long. As the final stitch drew closed, the cloth fluttered on its own, as if exhaling. Then the room went still again. Nia slumped forward, exhausted, resting her head against the edge of the table. Her breath slowed and sleep took her. But even in slumber, her fingers still rested on the edge of the cloth, warm, soft, and glowing faintly under the lamplight. Outside, clouds parted briefly to reveal a single star, blinking down as if it had been watching all along. In the forest, leaves rustled with secrets. And in the stillness of her heartbreak, something had changed. The dress was no longer just a dress. Nia sat in the dimly lit corner of her modest home, the silence pressing around her like a heavy cloak. Her loom stood beside her, silent for the first time in days. Her fingers, which had woven countless patterns through grief and memory, now trembled with exhaustion. She had poured all her sorrow into the cloth, hoping to find peace at the end of every stitch, but the ache still remained. The walls, once humming with the rhythm of weaving, now held only stillness and the sound of her breathing. The unfinished fabric lay draped over the mannequin, dull and lifeless under the oil lamp's flicker. Suddenly the room shifted. The air grew thick with warmth, a presence so gentle and ancient it soothed her bones. She looked up, startled. From the shadows emerged a figure radiant and calm, neither entirely human nor fully spirit. Nia's heart leapt to her throat. The woman had the same kind, wise eyes as her late grandmother. She wore a robe made of shifting light, and as she stepped closer, the scent of jasmine and old earth filled the air. Nia knelt instinctively, tears springing to her eyes. The spirit reached out, her voice soft as wind through leaves. Child of the loom, do not weep. Your sorrow has been heard beyond the veil. Your hands have spoken the language of your ancestors, and we have come. Nia dared to speak, her voice cracking. I've lost so much. I have nothing left to give. The spirit smiled, and it was the kind of smile that held centuries. True beauty, she whispered, touching the fabric gently, is never meant to be seen in celebration alone. It must bloom in shadows when the world turns away. It is in the moments of silence and grief that our light must rise. As she spoke, a glow passed from her hand into the cloth. The once dull fabric shimmered faintly, pulsing as though it had found breath. The gown you have begun carries the weight of stories long buried, of songs unsung, of pain endured. Let it be your voice. Let it be the echo of all who came before. Before Nia could respond, the spirit stepped back, her form slowly becoming translucent. Tonight rest. Let the cloth remember. You have done enough. And with that, she vanished, leaving behind only the fragrance of jasmine and a soft golden light lingering in the corners of the room. Too stunned to think, Nia lay on her sleeping mat, eyes wide open as the fabric across the room gleamed gently in the dark. A soft humming began to fill the air, not from her, not from any instrument, but from the cloth itself. She watched, barely daring to breathe. Throughout the night, the loom stood untouched, but the fabric on the mannequin began to stir. Threads wove themselves silently, pulled by unseen hands. The patterns shifted and grew, expanding into motifs Nia had never imagined but felt deeply familiar. Spirals of protection, stars of mourning, rivers of resilience. The color deepened from simple indigo to a spectrum of night skies, purples, blacks, blues, with a faint silver thread running through like moonlight. The sleeves formed delicately, shaped like the wings of a bird mid-flight. The bodice shimmered with a pattern of ancestral symbols, marks passed down through whispers, never written, only remembered. Nia stirred in her sleep, dreaming of voices, her grandmother's laughter, her mother's lullabies, the chants sung by women in the village during full moons. She dreamt of old dances and the stamping of feet on dry earth, of rain arriving as if called by the drums. And when she woke just before dawn, the room was still bathed in that soft light, and before her stood the gown, complete, majestic, and glowing faintly as if it held a piece of the morning sun. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but they weren't of sorrow anymore. They were the kind that came from recognition, from reunion. She stepped toward the gown, touching it lightly. It felt warm, like it had a heartbeat. She didn't need a mirror to know it was beautiful, not just in its form but in the spirit that wove it into being. Nia stood silently in the room as the first birds began to sing outside. She was not alone. Every thread whispered the names of women who had walked before her, who had endured, who had created in silence. The gown was not just a garment, it was a message. A message for those who dared to bloom in the darkest night, who found their power not in praise but in persistence. That morning Nia did not weave. She opened her window, letting the light fall upon the gown. For the first time in weeks she smiled. The ancestors had spoken. And through her hands, through that gown, she would let the world hear them again. The morning sun rose gently over the village, casting golden light on the thatched roofs and dew-covered leaves. The second day after the royal wedding was known to be more intimate, a celebration not of ceremony but of connection. While the previous day had overflowed with drums, dances and declarations, this gathering was quieter. It was a time for guests to mingle, to speak with the royal family, to share food and laughter in a setting that felt less like a throne room and more like home. Baskets of fruit lined the long wooden tables, and the scent of honeyed yams and grilled fish lingered in the air. Children ran about, still buzzing with excitement, and elders gathered under the shade of the baobab tree, exchanging stories and wisdom. The villagers arrived slowly, dressed in their finest, bright robes, headscarves, beaded jewelry, each one a reflection of lineage and pride. But even amid the elegance, no one expected what was to come. At the far edge of the village, near the weaver's hut, Nia stood still, staring at her reflection in a small piece of polished brass. The gown, the one gifted by the spirit, woven by unseen hands, clung to her like it had been waiting for her since the beginning of time. It shimmered with hues that shifted as she moved. One moment deep blue like ocean depths, the next pale silver like moonlight, and sometimes golden like dawn itself. The fabric seemed to ripple with life, reflecting not just light but emotion, memory, and grace. She took a breath, her fingers brushing the embroidered symbols on the bodice, each one a mark of a forgotten ancestor, now living again through her. With another breath, she stepped forward, barefoot, the hem of her gown brushing the earth as she made her way toward the gathering. The celebration was already alive with music and chatter when she arrived. But the moment her foot crossed the open courtyard, the sound began to quiet. One by one heads turned. Conversations paused. A hush swept through the crowd like a passing breeze. Plates were set down mid-air. Children stopped mid-laugh. All eyes fell on Nia. She walked slowly, her chin lifted not in arrogance but in the kind of quiet strength that comes from surviving, from enduring without losing softness. The crowd instinctively parted before her, as though drawn back by some ancient memory. Whispers rippled through the onlookers, some in awe, others in disbelief. Is that? Where did she? That's Nia, from the weaver's hut? But there was no denying her. The gown moved like it was made of water and air, catching the sunlight and turning it into poetry. It danced around her without wind, casting shadows that seemed to tell stories. Her hair was wrapped in a simple cloth, but even that glowed as if kissed by the stars. She did not smile, but her presence was a song, soft, haunting, and unforgettable. Her stepmother, who had spent years dulling Nia's light, stood frozen near the fruit table, her goblet halfway to her mouth. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and a flush of panic rose to her cheeks. Next to her, the two stepsisters stared, mouths slightly open, their finely tailored dresses suddenly seeming dull and lifeless in comparison. One of them made a sharp noise under her breath, a blend of a gasp and a scoff, but even that was swallowed by the silence around them. The prince, who had been speaking to an elder near the center of the courtyard, turned toward the shift in the crowd. At first he couldn't see her, only the movement of people stepping aside, some bowing their heads in awe, others blinking as though unsure if they were dreaming. And then she appeared. For a moment he simply stared. He had seen beauty before, his kingdom was full of it. But this was something else. This was beauty that carried story and spirit. This was the kind of presence that didn't just fill a space but reshaped it. His breath caught in his throat, and every word he'd just spoken vanished from his mind. Nia didn't seek him with her eyes. She didn't scan the crowd for anyone's approval. She moved with the calm of one who knew exactly who she was. She approached a table near the edge and sat beside an old woman with a crooked back, offering her a piece of roasted yam with a gentle smile. And yet, no one stopped watching her. Even the dancers who had just begun a slow rhythm faltered, unsure whether to continue. The village had never seen anything like it. This was not merely a dress. It was a statement. It was memory, magic, and defiance stitched into fabric. And in that moment, every cruel word, every chore, every year spent in the shadows fell away. Nia was not hidden anymore. She had arrived, not for attention, not for vengeance, but simply to be. And in being she changed everything. Even the prince, standing now with a hand over his heart, could feel it. The quiet celebration had become something else. The second day's gathering, meant to be modest, had turned sacred. For in that moment, the villagers were not just witnessing a young woman in a beautiful gown, They were witnessing the return of forgotten power, worn on skin that had waited too long to shine. The prince couldn't take his eyes off her. He stood there, frozen in place, the soft music of the gathering blending with the pounding of his heart. It wasn't just the beauty of her gown that held him, though that was enough to leave even the most hardened noble speechless. It wasn't just the way the light danced around her, as if she was made of sunlight and shadow, her very presence pulling the air into a quiet reverence. No, there was something else, a quiet dignity that radiated from her, something he had witnessed long ago, something that had etched itself into his memory. His mind raced. It was impossible, yet there was no mistaking it. Her face, that calm resolve, those deep eyes, he had seen them before years ago when he was just a child. It was at a time of great need, a time when he had been helpless and lost, without anyone to turn to but himself. And yet there she had been. It was one of his earliest memories that still clung to him in vivid detail. He had been ill, feverish and weak, alone in the royal palace when he was no older than 7. His parents had been attending a banquet in the neighboring kingdom, leaving him in the care of the royal attendants. None of them had noticed the slow onset of sickness, nor the fever that had taken hold of him in the dark of night. He had awoken alone in his bed, his body aching, his throat burning. Desperation had risen in his chest. There was no one around. He had felt the loneliness of his youth in that moment, as the illness raged and no one came to help. But then, through the haze of fever and confusion, there had been a presence. A quiet, warm presence like the calm before a storm. A small figure had appeared at the foot of his bed, someone who had known just what to do. She had been a little older than him, but it was her calmness that had soothed him most of all. She had given him water, a cooling cloth for his forehead, and with gentle hands she had fed him herbs that dulled the fever and soothed his pain. She never said a word, just smiled softly when he had asked who she was, and then slipped out of the room as silently as she had come. He had never learned her name, and the memory had remained with him as a quiet mystery, like the flicker of a dream. He had tried to recall the figure over the years, but the details had blurred until only the warmth of her presence lingered. But now, as he stood in the crowd, watching the woman in the shimmering gown, it all fell into place. This was the same girl, the one who had cared for him so selflessly when he had been a child, the one who had appeared out of nowhere and left as quietly as she had arrived. The realization hit him with a force that made his knees buckle. His heart pounded in his chest as his eyes locked onto hers. The connection was immediate, undeniable. She didn't recognize him, of course. How could she? But he knew. Nia, unaware of the storm of memories swirling in the prince's mind, was calmly accepting the stares of the crowd. She didn't flinch, didn't try to explain herself or her gown. The light from the gown seemed to flow around her like a living thing, and with every step she took, the crowd parted, whispers bubbling up in the air like the tide. Some were filled with awe, others with curiosity. There were murmurs of recognition, many wondering who this unknown woman was, this mysterious beauty who had captivated the prince's attention so completely. It wasn't long before the questions began, rising up like an unspoken command. The crowd grew restless, eager to know the identity of this enchanting figure. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who is she? Where does she come from? What is her name? The questions turned into a chorus, filling the space with an urgent desire for answers. The prince, still overcome by his discovery, took a step forward, but his voice faltered as he looked around at the eager faces. He couldn't allow this moment to be lost to the whims of idle gossip. He needed to speak with her, to know the woman who had touched his life so long ago. But before he could move, the tension was broken by a sharp voice, a voice Nia knew all too well. "Nia, what is this madness?" The words sliced through the air, cutting the quiet with cold sharpness. It was her stepmother, stepping forward with a sneer, her eyes narrowing as she regarded Nia with a mixture of contempt and disbelief. "This is some sort of foolishness. You are no one. You have no place here. You are nothing but a lowly weaver's daughter, and this ridiculous spectacle is an embarrassment." The crowd fell silent, all eyes now shifting between the prince and the stepmother. Nia's heart thudded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. Her stepmother's words were nothing new, just another attempt to diminish her, to push her back into the shadows where she had spent so many years. But Nia no longer belonged in the shadows. The prince's eyes, which had been locked on Nia with an intensity that no one could ignore, flicked to the stepmother with a sudden sharpness. His gaze hardened. "Silence," he commanded, his voice carrying authority. "She is no fool. She is a woman of dignity, and you will not speak to her as though she is beneath you." The words came out before he could stop them, a protective force rising in him like a shield. The stepmother recoiled, her mouth working in disbelief as if she had never been spoken to so directly. But the prince's gaze was unwavering as he turned back to Nia, the crowd now eerily quiet as they waited to see what would happen next. Nia's gaze met his. She didn't speak, not yet, but something passed between them, a recognition, a shared understanding of what had just unfolded. She took a slow breath, her heart calm amidst the storm, and finally she spoke. "I am Nia," she said softly, her voice steady and sure. "A weaver's daughter. A daughter of this land. And I do not need to be anyone else." The quiet that followed Nia's declaration hung heavily in the air, a weight that seemed to stretch time itself. All eyes were on her now, waiting. The prince's gaze was still locked onto hers, filled with questions and something else, an unspoken understanding that made her heart race ever so slightly. But the rest of the crowd, who had gathered to witness this moment, were silent in their anticipation. Her stepmother stood to the side, her lips twisted in a grimace, unsure of how to respond. Nia took a breath, steadying herself. Her voice was calm, like the steady flow of a river that had learned the art of patience. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth was her strength now. "I am Nia," she began, her words clear and unwavering. "I was born to a woman who once had a dream for me just as I had dreams for myself. But that dream was taken from me by cruelty and falsehood. My mother passed when I was young, leaving me to the hands of a stepmother who never saw me as her own. Instead, I became her tool, someone to mold and shape to her whims. She took what I had, my talent, my dreams, my dignity, and used them to her own advantage. She never saw me as more than a means to an end." The stepmother stiffened, her eyes flickering with a flash of panic, but Nia continued undeterred. Her voice, though soft, seemed to command the space around her. "I was forced to remain in the shadows, hidden away while others took credit for my work. I was told to stay silent, to know my place, and that I was nothing without their approval. But I never believed that. I knew deep down that my worth was not defined by the lies they told me, by the cage they tried to lock me in. And so, I kept weaving, kept working in the dark, in silence. My hands created pieces that no one saw, but my heart knew what they meant. They were my rebellion, my defiance." Her eyes, now steady and calm, met the prince's once again. He had not moved, his expression a mixture of wonder and disbelief, but there was no judgment in his gaze, only a deep understanding. And then one day something changed. Something I cannot explain, but perhaps it was the spirit of those who came before me. Perhaps it was the ancestors calling me to step into the light. The gown you see before you is not just fabric. It is the culmination of years of silence, of struggle. It is the story of my past, woven with the threads of hope, pain, and resilience. Nia's stepmother, now visibly rattled, opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The prince raised his hand, silencing her before she could interrupt. The queen, who had been quietly observing the exchange with the calm of one who had seen many power struggles in her time, looked deeply at Nia. There was no judgment in her eyes, only the quiet wisdom of a ruler who understood the weight of cruelty and injustice. The queen remained silent for a moment, taking in Nia's words, her story, and the unmistakable courage that radiated from the young woman. Then, slowly, the queen spoke, her voice carrying across the gathering with an authority that only she possessed. "Cruelty," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly as she turned toward the stepmother, "has no place in this kingdom. A kingdom built on the strength of its people, on the courage of its daughters. No woman should ever be silenced, no talent hidden, no heart ignored. You," she continued, her gaze now firmly fixed on the stepmother, "will answer for the lies you've spread. You will answer for the years of manipulation, for stealing a young woman's worth, and for trapping her in darkness." The stepmother flinched as if struck by an unseen blow. Her face went pale, the arrogance she had worn so comfortably in the presence of others now crumbling in the face of truth. She opened her mouth to speak, but the queen raised her hand, silencing her once more. "And you," the queen's gaze softened as she turned back to Nia, "are not what they've claimed you to be. You are not a servant to be dismissed, nor a mere weaver's daughter to be forgotten. You are an artist, and your work has the power to shape this kingdom." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. The prince, whose face had gone from shock to admiration, stepped forward, his voice clear and firm. "We have been blind to the true worth of the artists among us," he said, his tone laced with regret. "The people who shape not just the fabrics we wear, but the very spirit of the land. It is time we recognize those who bring beauty and truth into the world." The queen nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Nia, you are more than just a creator of cloth. You are a creator of legacy. And this kingdom will honor that legacy. The crowd stood still, the air thick with the weight of what had just been revealed. Nia's heart was racing, but she didn't allow herself to be swept away by the moment. She had already walked through the darkest parts of her life. This was just another step forward. Then the queen's next words made her breath catch in her throat. Nia, I invite you to join the Royal Design Guild, not as a wife but as an honored artist. You will be given the resources and support to create, to inspire, and to shape the future of this kingdom with your hands. The words echoed in Nia's mind. It was an offer beyond her wildest dreams, beyond anything she had imagined for herself. To be recognized, to be seen, to be valued for the art she created, not as a tool, not as someone's possession, but as an artist in her own right. She felt a wave of emotion threaten to overwhelm her, but she took a deep breath, steadying herself. For the first time in her life she stood tall, not as someone defined by others, but as someone who had found her own worth. The stepmother, now trembling, could only stand there, her face flushed with the weight of her own disgrace. Nia turned her gaze back to the queen, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. I accept your offer, your majesty. I will honor this opportunity as my ancestors would have wished. And in that moment, Nia knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her but for the entire kingdom. A chapter where truth would be unveiled, and beauty would rise from the shadows. The months that followed were filled with both challenge and fulfillment. Nia had been offered many luxuries, many opportunities to step into the halls of the palace, to design for nobles, to be heralded by the kingdom's elite. Yet, as tempting as those offers were, her heart remained steadfast. She had grown up with the scent of earth, the feel of humble cloth between her fingers, and the sound of a loom working in the quiet of the night. These simple things were woven into her soul, and she knew she could not abandon them. Instead, she opened a small atelier in the heart of the village, nestled between the cobblestone streets that wound their way through the bustling marketplace. It wasn't large or extravagant, but it was hers, a place where the hum of creativity and the magic of her craft could live. The atelier was modest, with wooden beams that gave it a rustic charm, and large windows that allowed sunlight to pour in, illuminating the fabrics that filled the space. There, Nia worked not just for the wealthy or the powerful, but for everyone, commoners, merchants, travelers, and those who had no other place to turn. She believed beauty was for all people, not just those with the power to pay a king's ransom for it. She designed gowns for women who had little, creating pieces that were both beautiful and practical, stitched with intricate patterns that told stories. For men, she crafted elegant tunics and cloaks, always with an eye for both style and comfort. And for children, she created clothes that were as joyful and free as their spirits, full of color and playfulness. Nia didn't just weave fabric, she wove stories into every stitch. Word quickly spread about the young designer and her magical creations. It was said that the dresses she made held a secret power, one that was whispered in the quiet corners of the village. Some said the garments were stitched with starlight, imbued with the healing energies of the night sky. Others claimed that wearing Nia's designs could ease sorrow and bring peace to troubled hearts. There was talk that women who wore her gowns found their worries lifted, that they walked taller, with more confidence and grace. Some swore that the dresses held the power to mend broken hearts, to heal emotional wounds that no medicine could touch. But Nia never claimed such things herself. She never spoke of the magic woven into her work, though there were moments when she could feel it. The energy that surged through her hands as she worked, the inexplicable calm that filled her soul as the needle moved in rhythm, as if guided by something greater than herself. Still, she remained grounded in the truth of her craft. She was an artist, and her art was meant to serve. She worked tirelessly, designing day and night, not for fame or fortune, but for the satisfaction of knowing she had created something that brought beauty and healing into the world. The prince visited often, though he never once pressured her. At first, it had been out of curiosity. He had heard the rumors, of course, and had seen her designs in the market on a few occasions, marveling at their simplicity and elegance. But what truly drew him to Nia's atelier was something deeper. It wasn't just her beauty, though that too was undeniable. It was the way she worked, the quiet confidence she exuded, and the hum of peace that surrounded her every time he entered. She seemed to be at home in the world in a way that he, despite all his wealth and power, could never fully understand. He had come the first time with a request for a cloak, something to wear for an evening event. But when he entered the small shop, it was as if the atmosphere itself had shifted. The warmth, the smell of natural dyes and linen, the soft glow of candles, all of it seemed to wrap around him like a cocoon. He had never felt so at ease in the presence of another person. Nia, with her hands busy at work, had greeted him not as a prince, but as a fellow artist. She had never bowed or curtsied, never treated him as someone elevated above her. She treated him with the respect that was due to any person, regardless of their station, and that had struck him as both refreshing and deeply moving. From that first meeting, the prince returned again and again, each time with a new request, sometimes for a piece of clothing, sometimes simply to talk. They never discussed matters of state, nor did the prince ever mention his royal status beyond the occasional polite remark. Instead, they talked about their lives, their experiences, their views on art and beauty. Nia was always curious about the world beyond her village, about the kingdom and its people, and the prince found solace in her perspective, which was untainted by the politics and the obligations that weighed heavily on him. Though their conversations were often quiet and unremarkable, there was something in the way they spoke that made him feel seen, heard, and understood. It was as if the world outside the small Italier fell away, leaving only the two of them, existing in a space where time didn't matter. Nia never asked for anything from him, never sought to advance her position, nor did she seem to care about the wealth and power he held. For the first time in his life, the prince was with someone who saw him as more than his title, more than his crown. And that was a gift he couldn't quite explain, but one he cherished deeply. For Nia, the prince's visits were a reminder that, despite the grandeur of the palace and the trappings of royalty, there was a simple truth: people were just people, no matter their station. She never saw him as a prince but as a man, someone with hopes and dreams, fears and doubts. And in his presence she found a kindred spirit, someone who understood the value of simplicity and authenticity. Their connection grew over time, but it was never rushed. The prince, though he admired her deeply, never pushed Nia into a position she wasn't ready for. He respected her boundaries, understood that she had a life outside the palace, and never sought to impose his will on her. His visits were always gentle, always respectful. In return, Nia respected the prince's space, never asking him to change or to alter his path for her. She was content in her world, in the atelier she had built with her own hands, surrounded by the fabrics she wove with love and care. She knew that, though the prince's presence was a quiet force in her life, it was not something that would define her. She had her own purpose, her own dreams, and she would follow them wherever they led. And so life went on as it always does. Nia's work flourished, her reputation spreading far and wide, not just in the kingdom but beyond. And the prince continued to visit, never asking for more than the friendship she was willing to offer. It was a bond built on respect, on shared creativity, and on the unspoken understanding that, sometimes, the greatest gift was simply being seen. The passing seasons saw the once powerful stepmother's influence wither away, fading like a leaf caught in a cold breeze. The queen's decree had struck the final blow to her reputation, exposing the lies and cruelty she had carefully constructed over the years. Her name, once spoken with a hint of respect, now became the subject of hushed whispers and barely veiled contempt. People no longer feared her, they pitied her. The high society that had once adored her for her wealth and status turned their backs, refusing to acknowledge her even when she crossed their paths. The great halls she once walked through with confidence now seemed far too empty, their walls echoing with her isolation. Her daughters, too, found themselves marginalized, their beauty no longer a source of power. Their vanity, once their greatest asset, had become their undoing. They had always been taught that their appearance would win them favor, that their wealth and status would give them everything they ever needed. But as the truth about their mother's deceit spread through the kingdom, people began to look past their outward beauty, seeing them for what they truly were: vain, shallow, and devoid of the inner qualities that earned true respect. The villagers who once admired the stepmother's daughters for their grace and allure now spoke of them with scorn. The women were shunned, their once flawless reputations shattered. The men who had once courted them with eager attentions now turned away, realizing that beauty without integrity was a hollow thing. Even in the palace, they were no longer invited to the royal events they once attended with great pride. Their world, which had seemed so secure, now crumbled around them, piece by piece. The lesson was clear to everyone. Vanity could only carry one so far before the truth emerged, exposing the emptiness beneath. In contrast, Nia flourished. Her work, humble yet exquisite, earned her not just the admiration of the common folk, but the deep respect of those who had once ignored her. She had become a symbol of resilience, grace, and talent. People came from all corners of the kingdom to seek her out, not just for her skill as a designer, but for the warmth she exuded, the quiet strength that shone through every stitch she made. She was no longer just a weaver, she was an artist, someone whose creations were said to have the power to heal both body and soul. Nia's humble atelier became a sanctuary for those who needed something more than just clothes. They needed hope, comfort, and a reminder of the goodness in the world. She was sought after by both the commoners and royals alike, her gowns and garments becoming a symbol of inner beauty and true artistry. She never sought fame, never allowed the praise to get to her head. She remained grounded in her roots, always remembering the pain of her past and the lessons it had taught her. Her success did not go unnoticed by the stepmother, who now found herself in a position of utter despair. She had lost everything: the power she had once wielded, the respect she had taken for granted, and the daughters she had molded into vanity's image. She sat in the quiet of her home, the walls that had once echoed with laughter and music now filled with the silence of defeat. She had no one left to turn to, no one who would look upon her with favor. One day, after months of solitude and reflection, the stepmother made a decision. She would seek out Nia. She would beg for forgiveness, though she knew that forgiveness was not easily given. But there was nothing left for her now, no pride to protect, no walls to hide behind. It was an act of desperation, but she knew it was the only way to perhaps redeem whatever remnants of dignity she had left. With trembling hands, the stepmother set out to find Nia, her heart heavy with the weight of the past. She arrived at the atelier where Nia was at work, her hands moving with quiet grace as she stitched a delicate gown. The stepmother hesitated at the door, unsure of how to begin, but Nia, sensing her presence, looked up from her work. Their eyes met, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Nia, having heard of the stepmother's plight, did not judge her, but her face remained calm and unreadable. It was clear that the stepmother had come with a heavy heart, seeking something she had never before considered: humility. Finally, the stepmother spoke, her voice quiet but filled with remorse. "Nia," she began, her words faltering at first, I have come to ask for your forgiveness. I know I can never undo the harm I have caused you, or the years I spent trying to break you. I see now the error of my ways. I see the truth that I could never see before, and I am sorry for all that I did to you." There was a long pause. Nia's gaze softened, though her expression remained composed. She understood the weight of those words. So often, those who had wronged others were too proud to admit their faults. But the stepmother had come, vulnerable and broken, and Nia knew that this act, however small, was a step toward healing. Without saying a word, Nia reached for a simple garment she had been working on. A warm, earth-toned cloak woven with soft wool, the kind of garment meant for comfort rather than grandeur. She handed it to the stepmother, a quiet symbol of what she had become. It was not a dress made of starlight, nor a gown filled with magic. It was simple, warm, and humble, just like the life Nia had chosen to live. "This is for you," Nia said softly. "It is not cursed as you may have expected. It is simply a garment, one that will keep you warm. It is a symbol of letting go. Let go of the past, of the pride and vanity that have bound you for so long. Let it go and embrace the new path that lies ahead." The stepmother's eyes filled with tears, the weight of her past mistakes flooding her all at once. She had come expecting rejection, or perhaps an elaborate punishment. But instead she was met with kindness, a kindness she had never shown to Nia. She took the cloak, her hands trembling as she draped it over her shoulders. In that moment she felt something shift within her. For the first time she allowed herself to feel the warmth of forgiveness, the softness of grace. "Thank you," the stepmother whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for showing me that change is possible. I have been wrong and now I see that." Nia simply nodded, her heart filled not with anger but with quiet peace. She had no desire to hold on to resentment or bitterness. The stepmother had made her choices, but she, too, was a human being capable of change. And sometimes change came in the quietest of ways: a simple garment, a humble gesture, and the willingness to let go. As the stepmother turned to leave, she walked with a new weight on her shoulders, not the burden of her past, but the lightness of a heart that had finally begun to heal. And for Nia, the memory of that moment would stay with her always, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, there was always room for compassion. Years had passed since Nia had woven her first gown that shimmered like the stars. The village had changed in many ways, but the story of the dress that had enchanted both commoners and royalty alike was one that remained etched in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. The golden threads of that day, the magic in every stitch, and the humility of the woman who had worn it were now legends whispered on warm evenings, passed down from one generation to the next. Nia had grown older, her hands now more skilled, the lines on her face a reflection of the years of work and wisdom she had acquired. But her spirit remained as young as it had been that day when the divine had first touched her craft. She had long since left the small atelier where she had begun her journey. She had expanded her work, creating pieces that transcended the earthly boundaries of fabric and thread. She had crafted gowns that could heal broken hearts and tunics that whispered tales of love and hope, but she never forgot where it had all started. The moment the world had seen her for who she truly was, not just the humble seamstress, but the artist, the woman who had the power to bring beauty into the world with her hands. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the village, a little girl came to Nia's home. She was no more than 8 or 9, with bright eyes and a curiosity that could not be contained. Her mother had told her stories of the great Nia, the seamstress whose dresses held magic, whose hands had touched the stars. The girl had heard these stories many times, but today she was determined to hear them from the woman herself. The little girl stood at the door, her small hands clutching the edge of her simple dress, eyes wide with wonder. Nia, who was tending to her garden, looked up and smiled warmly as she always did when a child came to her. The village was a place where every face felt familiar, but the innocent questions of children still carried the weight of sincerity that moved Nia's heart every time. "Grandmother Nia," the girl began shyly, using the term of affection that had come to be for Nia in the village over the years, "will you tell me how you made the dress? The one that shone like the stars, the one that made the prince fall in love with you." Nia paused, her hands resting on the garden tools as she considered the question. She had told this story many times, but each time, it felt new, filled with the same wonder and magic that had colored the day when she had first stepped into the post-wedding gathering, wearing the gown that had forever changed her life. But now, with years of wisdom and reflection behind her, Nia understood the deeper meaning behind that dress. It wasn't just fabric or stitches, it was something much more profound, something that transcended the physical world and touched the very core of what it meant to be human. She beckoned the girl to sit beside her on the wooden bench under the old oak tree that had long provided shade for her thoughts. The tree's gnarled branches stretched above them, leaves whispering in the wind as if they too were eager to hear the story. "You see, my dear," Nia began softly, her voice carrying the weight of memories, "the dress was made of more than just fabric. It wasn't just thread woven together or beads sewn into patterns. It was made of all the things I had lived through, the joy, the pain, the sorrow, and the hope. I didn't sew it just with my hands. I sewed it with my heart. I sewed it with the memories of my mother, the love I had for my grandmother, the years I spent dreaming by the firelight. I sewed it with the pain of losing my family, of feeling invisible, of believing I would never be seen. And I sewed it with the hope that one day, I would be able to stand tall and be proud of who I was, not for anyone else but for myself." The girl listened intently, her small face full of wonder. "But how did you make it shine so brightly, Grandmother Nia?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "How did it glow like that?" Nia smiled, her eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that only years of living could bring. She gazed up at the sky, watching the clouds drift lazily across the horizon, as if the answers were written in the very heavens themselves. "The dress didn't glow because of magic or enchantments, child," Nia said, her voice steady but filled with quiet wisdom. "It glowed because it was made in a moment of truth. When I put on that gown, I wasn't wearing just a piece of cloth. I was wearing everything that I had lived. The laughter of my childhood, the tears of my hardships, the strength I had found in myself when I thought I had nothing left. It was all in that dress. And when I stood before the prince, before the world, it wasn't my beauty that shone. It was the truth of who I was, the strength, the resilience, the beauty of my soul. That is what made it glow." The little girl's eyes widened as she absorbed this new understanding. She had always thought that magic came from spells and potions, from things that were beyond human control. But now she saw that true magic came from within, from the heart and the soul. It was a magic that could not be seen with the eyes, but could be felt deep in the bones, in the way a person carried themselves, in the way they faced the world. "Do you still have the dress?" the girl asked, her voice soft with reverence. Nia's eyes sparkled with a memory and she nodded. "I do, child. It is kept in the village temple, not for royalty, not for anyone who seeks to own it. It is there as a reminder that the divine often wears quiet faces. The dress is not for those who seek grandeur or perfection. It is for those who understand that true beauty is not in what you see but in what you feel. It is for those who know that the divine is in each of us, in the simple, everyday moments. In the way we help one another, in the way we love and forgive. That is the true light that shines." The little girl was quiet for a moment, her mind processing all that Nia had shared. She looked up at the old woman, her eyes filled with respect and admiration. "I want to make dresses like you someday," she said, her voice filled with determination. Nia chuckled softly, reaching out to gently pat the girl's head. "You will, child. But remember, when you sew, it is not just with thread. It is with memory, pain, and hope. And above all, it is with love." The girl smiled, her heart full of dreams of the future, of dresses made not just of fabric, but of the very essence of life itself. As the years passed, the story of Nia and her divine dress continued to be shared throughout the village, whispered from one generation to the next. The dress, now preserved in the temple, was no longer a symbol of royal beauty or wealth. It had become a symbol of something much more profound. A reminder that beauty in its truest form is not something that can be bought or owned. It is something that is created, nurtured, and shared. It is something that shines not in the eyes of those who seek to possess it, but in the hearts of those who recognize its quiet, sacred power. Nia lived out her days in peace, content in the knowledge that her craft had touched the lives of many, that her art had transcended the material world and become something eternal. And as the little girl grew older, she too carried Nia's wisdom with her, sewing not just with thread, but with memory, pain, and hope, spreading the quiet magic of the divine through her own hands. For in the end, it was not the dress that mattered most. It was the love and truth woven into it that had made it immortal. And that was a lesson that would endure long after the fabric had faded.